Welcome back. In this session, we are going to focus on creating the delete activity. As you can see, first we need to create the link service to store the connection information about the storage account. We then need to create a dataset to hold the information about the folder name to be deleted. We can then create the pipeline with the delete activity to delete the file. I'll also demonstrate how to execute the pipeline once that's created. Let's switch over to Synapse Studio and get started. Here we are in the Synapse Studio. As we said, we are going to start with creating a linked service which points to our storage account. So in order to create a link service, you click on the Manage Hub here and you pick Link Services, which you'll see on the menu under External Connections. Let me click on Link Services. You will see a few link services created by default. Let me explain what they are. The top one gives us access to the pandemic lake that's created when we brought in the sample data, and the other two are created as part of the workspace creation. So when we create the workspace, we specify the default storage. So this one here, the bottom one, points to the default storage, which is the Learn Synapse Step-by-Step DL. And the other one gives us access to the dedicated SQL pool. Please note that it gives us access to the dedicated SQL pool at the moment by default. It doesn't create a link service to point to the serverless SQL pool. So we need to create one for our purposes. We'll do that when we come to deal with the script activity. But at the moment, we only need access to the storage account. As you could see here, there's already a linked service which gives us access to the storage card. But we're not going to do that because I want to show you how to create a link service from scratch so that you get a better understanding. Before we do that, let's go into this link service and look at all the details so that we get a better understanding before we create our own link services. So the first thing to look at is the URL. As you can see, this URL points to the Learn Synapse Step-by-Step DL storage account, which is our default storage account. And the other thing you may notice is the authentication. So we know the URL, but we need access to the storage account. There are multiple ways of authenticating, so you can use the account key, service principal, user sign, managed identity, system assigned managed identity. So in this case, it's recommended to use the system assigned managed identity. Let me show you what that is. So as you can see here, that is a managed identity with the name Learn Synapse Step-by-Step WS, which is created by default when you create the workspace, and that already has access to our storage account as well as to the workspace. Let me show you where that managed identity is so that you know what to look for. So you come over to Credentials, and within Credentials you'll see a workspace system identity. And if you go there, you'll see the managed state entity name, which is Learn Synapse Step-by-Step. This managed identity already has access to our storage account. And also, if you go over to Access Control here, this has been defined as a Synapse administrator on the workspace. So you can access the workspace as well as it's got access to the default storage as well. So we'll use the same identity when we create the link service. Let's go over to Link Services and start creating our link service. So in order to create a new link service, you click on the New and here. And then you need to pick up the service for which you want to create the link service part. As you can see, we've got a number of services listed here, so we can create link services pointing to any of these services. But in our case, we're going to create a link service to our Azure storage account. So if you scroll down, you will find Azure Data Lake Gen 2 storage. So I'm going to click on that and then click Continue. And now we need to give a name for our link service. So come up with something which is meaningful. Don't just give it else one to whatever you want to come up with some naming standard so that it's easier to find the link service you want. So I'm going to call it URLs to represent a link service, and I'm going to give the same name as my storage account, which is the Learn Synapse Step-by-Step DL. So now we need to fill in the other details. You can leave the integration and runtime as the default one. You can create separate integration runtimes, but we're going to use the default one here for the course. And now we need to pick the authentication type. As we said before, we are going to go for the system assigned managed identity, and that's already given us the details here. As you can see, we've got the Learn Synapse Step-by-Step as the managed identity, and that's already got access to the storage account. So let's pick our storage account. So let's pick up the subscription first. You may have a free trial or any other store subscription you might use for the course picked up. So let's now pick the storage account name. Mine is the Learn Synapse Step-by-Step DL. So I picked the storage account name. You can now test the connection. So the connection is now successful. So let's click on Create, and that should create the link service. So we have the link service. So link services were only created when you published that to the workspace. So let me click on Publish All, and that's going to publish my link service. So that will be available for us to use. So the changes are now deployed. So I've got the link service ready. The next thing we want to do is to create the integration dataset. In order to create the integration dataset, you come over to the Data Hub and then click on the plus here to add a new resource and click on Integration Dataset. Again, you will be presented with the services for which you can create the dataset for, and we want to pick out as your data storage and to again, that's what I'm going to do. And then let's click Continue, and it'll ask you to choose the format of our data. So the format of the data in our silver layer is going to be Parquet, and that's the file we are going to delete. But it doesn't really matter in our case because we are going to delete the entire folder rather than individual files. But if you are working with individual files, you need to choose the right format. I'm still going to choose Pocket, but even if you select any other format, it wouldn't matter at all. Let me now click Continue, and it's going to ask for a name for our dataset. I'm going to give it a name with DS to represent dataset, and I'm going to give the schema or the layer, which is a silver layer, and I'm going to give the name of the file, which is the taxi zone in this case. Now we need to select the link service, which gives us access to the dataset or the folders. So we created one just now. I'm going to pick that rather than the default one. So that is the Learn Synapse Step-by-Step DL. We need to now provide the file path, which represents the dataset. As I said before, we are going to go up to the folder and not the files, so I'm going to just give the names. There are a couple of options. You can edit this and put the values here if you want, or you can just click on the browse and select the folder. So we know actually we are going to delete the data from our NYC taxi data container, and we are going to do it from the silver folder and the taxi zone folder. Underneath that, we're not going to pick the Parquet files, we are just going to leave it at that because the Parquet files could have different names on different executions, so it's better to delete the entire folder. So let me click OK. And as you can see, it's filled up. So we got the container name, and then we got the folder / the other folder, which is the taxi zone folder. We don't need to specify any schema because we are not operating on schema here. But if you are doing copy activity, for example, and then you're mapping individual columns, we need to have a schema as well. But in this case, it doesn't really matter. So let me click on None and click OK. So we now have our dataset as well. Let me publish the dataset to the workspace as well. And we now have the dataset and the link service. So the dataset is now published. If you want to see all the datasets you have in the workspace, you come over to the Data Hub and then click on Link. Under Integration Datasets, you will see the dataset. So as you can see, we've just got one. But if you have more, you will see them listed here as well. So that's the end of this session. In the next session, I'll show you how to create the pipeline with the delete activity.